And in today's lecture of mine, I'll be telling you about CSR policy, its need and content, and along with that, we'll have a discussion on impact assessment also. So, in the previous lecture of mine, I told you about the CSR committee that Section 135 of Companies Act stipulates that once you fulfill certain criteria to become eligible to spend 2% of your profit on listed CSR activities, as a company you have to constitute a CSR committee, and that committee is supposed to formulate the CSR policy and determine the philosophy of the company, and everything about CSR they are supposed to decide, starting from the philosophy till implementation, and then after that also, even after implementing CSR activities or spending that money, they have to review whatever has happened. So the responsibility of the role of this CSR committee becomes pivotal. They are playing a pivotal role in implementation of CSR policy. So it becomes pertinent for us to know what exactly is CSR policy, what is the content of it, what are the ingredients of essential ingredients of CSR policy, and what is the need of designing CSR policy. So let us first talk about need of CSR policy. The CSR committee actually formulates and recommends CSR policy to board of directors, and then eventually board of directors they approve the same, and the CSR policy basically comprises of list of activities to be undertaken by the company, which are basically related to activities mentioned in Schedule 7 of the Companies Act. So while designing or drafting the CSR policy, the committee is supposed to keep in mind whatever is given in Schedule 7 of the Companies Act, which is being called as listed activities to be undertaken for CSR. So this committee basically formulates and makes a recommendation to the board of directors, and board of directors they approve the same. So the need of it is, since it is coming from the mandate, they have to basically draft a policy and get it approved from the board of directors. Now the question comes, what all is there into this CSR policy? What are the key ingredients of this CSR policy, what we call as contents of CSR policy? So first very point of CSR policy is company's philosophy on CSR spending. What company, from what perspective company is thinking about this CSR activities performed by the company? What is basically the motive of your company while implementing such CSR activities or spending on CSR activities? The way that you are looking at CSR activities, like certain companies they talk about the sustainable development, and they write in their philosophy that our objective is to save our environment, save our mother earth. Some companies they are writing that our objective is to create an atmosphere where every children is having at least they are having sufficient level of they complete their primary education properly. Some companies they write that their objective is to enhance GER, that is gross enrollment ratio. So while drafting their CSR philosophy, companies they discuss their focal points, say in bullets also, in points also 1, 2, 3, 4, that these are the key parameters of our CSR activities to be undertaken by the company, and our philosophy regarding CSR is this. You can find a glimpse of the same in the annual report of any company when you read their CSR report, and even on their website they give a mention that what is their CSR philosophy, what is the company's philosophy on CSR spending, that they write there. And it is unique for every company. They have the freedom to decide, but while drafting that, while crafting that, they have to keep in mind the listed activities in Schedule 7 of the Companies Act 2013. Second very important aspect of CSR policy is targeted approach. They have to write that what is out of all listed activities, what is the list of priority projects, whether we are willing to spend on health, or we are willing to spend on education, or we are willing to spend on any other aspect, any other listed activity. I have already told you about the list of activities which are being provided in Schedule 7 when we were talking about the introduction of CSR, the enactment. When I was telling you about the legal framework of CSR in India, I told you about the listed activities in Schedule 7 with regard to CSR, and out of those activities, the company may decide the list of priority projects. They may take only one, they may take more than one, or they may take all. Some companies, they are taking 5-6 activities out of them. Some companies say that we will be working in a phased manner for all activities listed in Schedule 7. So depending on your targeted approach, you may decide, you may choose from the listed activities while drafting your CSR policy. Then third point is that what will be the process of implementation, that also we are supposed to find in CSR policy of a company. So while drafting CSR policy, the third step after deciding philosophy and list of priority projects, they have to clearly mention that what shall be the process of implementation, the way it will be implemented, whether all the activities of CSR shall be carried out by the company itself, or you will be hiring some agencies, you will be taking help of some agencies. I will be telling you what all are the provisions for that, but there is a mention of the same in your CSR policy. What shall be the modality of your execution, the way these activities shall be executed, that will also find a mention in your CSR policy. Guiding principles for formulation of annual action plan. What will be your annual action plan for CSR activities, and what shall be the guiding principle while formulating the annual action plan. Process of monitoring and reviewing the projects or programs. Who all will monitor and review, who will be responsible for monitoring and reviewing of the projects, so that you are actually generating the desired results. So with whatever philosophy we are starting our CSR activities, whether we end up with the achievement of those goals or not, and for that monitoring and reviewing is very important or essential, and that also is supposed to be mentioned in your CSR policy. And whatever surplus you create, you generate out of CSR projects, remember my dear learners, that whatever profit, suppose if company is spending some amount on CSR projects, they are having their own CSR activities, and out of those CSR projects they are they are earning some money, they are creating some surplus out of that. So that surplus shall never form part of your business profit. That will actually be considered as a resource generated by that CSR project, and that has to be spent for the betterment of that project only. That should be for CSR activities only, because that is not being generated from the core activities of your business. So business, whatever you have earned, whatever surplus business has generated out of CSR projects, that should be spent on CSR activities only. So while drafting CSR policy, company is supposed to mention each and everything. There is not supposed to be any room for ambiguity or doubt that what should be the modality of execution, we don't know. What should be the process of monitor, who will monitor, who will review and will see in future. No, everything has to be mentioned in the CSR policy which is being drafted by the CSR committee. So you can say that it is a kind of constitution, it is a kind of list of do's and don'ts, the list of rules, list of procedures which your company is supposed to follow with regard to implementation of CSR policy. And this actually this CSR policy of company makes your CSR activity very meticulous, very proper, also very disciplined also, because unless we are disciplined into our approach, we cannot generate desired results. So basically, while drafting your CSR policy, you have to keep these things in mind, and that is basically the content of the core content of your CSR policy. So the CSR committee is basically drafting this CSR policy, and the content I have already told you. Now the question comes, board of directors, they are supposed to approve it. What is the role of board of directors? Is it only limited to approval of whatever the committee has recommended, or it is more than that? So I thought it pertinent to tell you what all roles they are supposed to play with regard to CSR activities, although they have other roles also to play, but since we are talking about CSR, we shall be confining our discussion to the role of board of directors with regard to CSR activities only. So first step, the first very function they have to perform is that they are supposed to constitute a CSR committee as per the provisions laid down in the Companies Act 2013. Once they have constituted a CSR committee, that committee will draft a policy and recommend the same to the board of directors for approval. So the second activity which they are supposed to perform is they have to approve CSR policy and priority projects. Whatever policy company has formulated, either they can approve it as it is, or they may suggest certain modifications also. So they may decide. So second step, second role of board of directors is that they have to approve CSR policy. Next is they have to approve annual report on CSR. Whatever report this committee has created to be annexed to the annual report, they are supposed to approve the same. The committee is basically accountable towards board of directors, and the CSR committee submits its report to board of directors, and they are approving annual report on CSR. And after that, they have to, the next step, next role they have to play is they have to monitor minimum spending for the purpose of CSR, whether 2% of the profit is spent on listed CSR activities or not. This is also a role of board of directors to monitor that whether we are fulfilling those conditions or not. They have to satisfy themselves regarding utilization of funds dispersed, whatever funds have been dispersed, whether they are spent satisfactorily or not, whether they are spent properly or not, and for the listed activities also. And eventually they have to approve disclosure of reasons of unspent CSR expenditure, if any. If company could not spend the 2% of their profit or stipulated amount of CSR, the profit on listed CSR activity, then the reasons of unspent CSR expenditure, they are supposed to also approve the same, that whatever we are going to disclose in the annual report of the company or on the website of the company, that need approval of board of directors. So one should not think that their role is limited to constitution of a committee only, that they have constituted a committee and then they are nowhere in the picture. No, they are supposed to take care of whatever committee is doing. They have to be very vigilant while monitoring the activities of the CSR committee. So this committee, whatever this committee does, the proposal, the policy they formulate, you have to approve. Once they have created an annual report, you have to approve the same. You have to monitor their minimum spending. You have to satisfy whether the funds are properly utilized for the given purpose or not, and then you have to approve the disclosure of reasons of unspent CSR expenditure if it is there. Because earlier, and this last activity becomes very important, because earlier there was no penal provision. Now we have penal provisions also. So after compliances, I shall be telling you about what all are the penal provisions if you don't spend, if your company is not able to spend the desired amount on listed CSR activity, what will happen. So that is also there, and this point of approval of disclosure of reasons of unspent CSR expenditure becomes very significant. So board of directors, they are supposed to play another role here also, that they have to approve disclosure of reasons of unspent amount on CSR activities. Now, after understanding the role of CSR committee and board of directors, we are very much clear about, we have got a better clarity of the way CSR is supposed to be implemented in our company. Now another question comes to our mind: what all are the models of implementing CSR activities? Will every company go on its own, appoint, constitute their CSR committee, and that committee will actually formulate a proposal? That proposal will go to board of directors for approval, and they will be doing that. So what are the models of implementing CSR activities? That now we are going to discuss. There are different ways of implementing CSR activities. One can be self-implementation. You can implement on your own, company may implement on its own, or jointly with some other company. You can go through implementation agencies. So there are different ways. If you ask me, broadly there are three ways. Either company can go for implementing it on their own, or jointly with some other company, or through some implementation agencies. When you are doing it on your own or jointly with some other company, there is no problem. But when you are going through certain implementation agencies, it can either be established by the company, either you can establish your own agency for that. It can be a Section 8 company, it can be a public trust, it can be a society for this purpose. So as a company, you can have your own agency, or you can hire certain establishment and certain agencies established by the government for that purpose. Again, they also have they are also found in three categories. Either they are Section 8 companies, or they are certain trust or society, or you can go for certain public agencies also, and there also you find the similar kind of setup. So when you are doing it on your own or jointly with some other company, there is no problem. But when you are going through some implementation agency, you have a choice. Either you go for Section 8 company, or you go for public trust, or you go for society. So broadly speaking, my dear learners, you may find different types, different ways of implementing CSR activities, uh, which is being resorted by different types of companies. Some companies, they find they have their own manpower, they have their own resources, so they feel it good to go ahead with their own department. They create their own CSR department, and their employees are there are dedicated employees for performing those activities. Whereas some companies feel that we should focus on our own core areas, our business, and we can hire certain implementation agencies for the purpose of CSR. But we need to know what are the different types of agencies. So there are 4 types of agencies as far as Rule 4 Part 1 is concerned, with regard to Companies Act 2013. First is Section 8 company, public trust or society. Basically they are meant for, they are basically working as not for profit organizations, and there can be government agencies. Again, under that you have Section 8 company, trust or society. You can have statutory bodies, entities under Act of Parliament or state legislature, which are working for the betterment of the society, and they may work for any of the listed activities. So statutory bodies can also be there, and there can be public agencies, and under that category also you may have different types of entities working. So 4 types of agencies, broadly speaking, when it comes to hire certain agencies. So either you establish your own company, Section 8 company, or public trust or society, or you go for government agencies, or you go for statutory bodies, or you go for hiring public agencies. Now there are certain registrations required. These implementing agencies, they are supposed to go for applying for at least 2 registration, one with Ministry of Corporate Affairs in all cases. So all 4 types of entities, they are supposed to get registered with MCA, that is Ministry of Corporate Affairs. And second is income tax registration, which is in case of number 1 and 4. So when we talk about number 1, that is Section 8 company, public trust or society which you are establishing, and number 4 is public agencies, which are not government agencies and statutory bodies. So if you are not hiring an agency which is either belonging to a category of government agency or a statutory body, then in that case you have to go for having another registration, that is income tax registration. That trust is supposed to have income tax registration also, and these trusts have to be registered with registrar of assurances, registrar of assurances also, the companies also. And while implementation of CSR activities, Rule 4 provides that carrying out of CSR activities either by company itself or through the specified implementation agencies. And remember, while implementing the CSR activities, we have 2 ends, we have 2 sides, or what you can say that you have 2 different corners, 2 different ends. One is the company as a principal, that company basically which is supposed to spend 2% of their profit on CSR activities, and the second one is the ultimate beneficiaries as a destination. So the point of origin is the company, because company is acting as a principal entity which is supposed to spend 2% of their profit on CSR activities as per their CSR policy. Now we can say that company will spend as per CSR policy, because while drafting CSR policy they have taken care of Schedule 7 listed activities under Schedule 7, and the ultimate beneficiary as a destination. So we need to understand that all those who are at the receiver's end, they are basically the ultimate beneficiary, and they are being called as a destination. And implementing agencies, if you are hiring them, they are basically acting as an intermediary. So you can say between the principal, that is company, and the ultimate beneficiary, the implementation agencies, they come. So their role is whatever company has decided, whatever philosophy with which company is moving ahead with regard to CSR activities, these agencies are supposed to implement the same in letter and spirit. And ultimate beneficiaries, they of course they are there to receive the benefit of these CSR activities, and their role comes when the company goes for monitoring and reviewing that whether the benefit is reaching to the ultimate beneficiary or not. So now the question comes, after understanding the role and function of CSR committee and board of directors, it is important for us to know what all implementation agencies are supposed to do. What are their functions? What is their role in this entire chain of activities, in this entire chain of entities working for the betterment of our society by the way of expenditure on CSR activity. So their first function is that they have to go for aggregation of spending by several group companies. Suppose if they are dealing with several companies or several group companies which are working for the different causes, they have to go for aggregation of spending. Suppose if you in your company is having different segments, and in your group there are 10 companies, so they have to, and you have hired an agency, so they'll first go for aggregation of spending by several group companies. And second step, second function of there will be, they shall be identifying CSR opportunities, that what are the areas which are getting aligned with the, while being aligned with the CSR policy of the company, what are the CSR opportunities that they have to identify, and they have to coordinate with the end beneficiaries. So this is the role of agencies, that they have to coordinate with the ultimate beneficiaries, and then they have to monitor of CSR implementation. And do remember that implementation agencies, they essentially save company from the drudgery, or you can say the hard work of working for the cause of CSR, and let them focus upon strategizing, deciding and spending their time on the different aspects of the company. So they can strategize, you can decide, you can spend if you are not engrossed into the day-to-day implementation of CSR activities. This is another way of looking at or this is another way of looking at the justification of appointment of implementation agencies. So the companies which are basically not implementing their CSR activities on their own, they resort to appointment of certain implementation agencies, and justification is that if we are doing so, we may better focus upon strategizing, deciding and spending on CSR, and greater amount of money can be spent, or we can strategize in a better manner if we are not involved into the routine activities of CSR implementation. So this is another logic which companies are very often giving as a reason for appointment of implementation agencies. Now there are certain important questions again. Why I always come up with the question, because whenever we are having a class discussion, my learners are having certain questions, and I feel that these questions, they eliminate your doubt also. So another question: whether disbursal to implementing agency is considered as spending? Do you think that whatever amount, suppose I am working as a company and I fulfill those any one of those three conditions, and I am supposed to spend 2% of my profit on CSR activity. So what I did, I decided, I calculated the 2% of my profit on CSR, transferred the money to that agency, to some implementing agencies. So am I free with this CSR activities? There is a question from the learners, that am I free, shall I consider myself to be free, that I have disbursed the money and my job is done? Answer is no. It is basically, if you look at the frequently answered by the ministry to the frequently asked questions, and it is available on the website of Ministry of Corporate Affairs, and FAQ number is 7.4, and they have mentioned that it is merely parking of funds to agency of the company. You have simply parked your funds, you have simply transferred your fund, you have not implemented CSR activities. So cause enactment is not saying that you transfer the money to certain listed funds, no, to certain agencies and your job is over. No, you have to basically spend, ensure that expenditure is being done on listed CSR activities. So it is basically merely a parking of funds to agency of the company, and it is not regarded as expenditure on CSR. Agency is basically acting on behalf of my company and not independently. Whatever agency is doing, it is doing on my behalf, because I have hired that agency for implementation of my CSR policy. So treatment of, not only that, treatment of fund, any fund which is lying unspent with the implementation agency at the end of the financial year, is same as that of money which is lying with the company. So it would be considered that whatever money is left unspent with the agency, you remember that it is regarded as good as it is with me as a company, because that agency is working on my behalf. So I cannot say that I have transferred money to agency and agency could not fulfill its promise, could not keep its promise. Whatever agency does, we as a company are supposed to be responsible for that, because we are working as principal and they are working as our agent. So whatever the agencies are doing, they are basically doing on our own behalf. So remember, my dear learners, if you have any doubt that disbursal of fund to implementing agencies will actually suffice and you would say that your amount is spent, so answer is no, that cannot be considered as your expenditure. Now coming to reporting and disclosures, the board's report of the company basically covered under the section has to report certain things in the certain points related to CSR activities, and it is stipulated in the enactment that board's report of company covered under the section has to report following points in the annual report for financial year commencing on or after April 1, 2020, because this enactment came in, this provision came in April 1, 2020. So you have to briefly provide an outline of CSR policy. You have to mention composition of CSR committee, including attendance of directors in the committee meeting. You have to offer a web link of website where CSR committee, CSR policy and projects which are being undertaken by the company are disclosed. And not only that, you have to provide a mention of impact assessment report. If you have any, if you have conducted impact assessment by some agency, that report on CSR project is also supposed to be there. Details of amount available for set off and amount required for set off for the financial year, that also is supposed to be reported in the CSR report of the company. Average net profit of last 3 financial year and prescribed CSR expenditure, so that anybody who is reading the annual report of the company may do the computation that see this was the profit and whether that 2% of profit is being spent on CSR activities or not. Surplus, whatever you have generated out of CSR projects of the previous financial year, if any, that is also supposed to be reported. And the details of total amount spent or unspent, whatever is there for the financial year, along with the name of the fund in which amount has been transferred, that also is supposed to be mentioned in the CSR report. Details of CSR amount spent against ongoing projects and other than ongoing projects for the financial year, and amount spent in administrative overheads and impact assessment, that also is supposed to be separately mentioned in the annual report. And of course unspent CSR amount for preceding 3 financial year is supposed to be mentioned. Details of CSR amount spent in financial year for ongoing projects of preceding financial year, whatever capital asset you have created, asset wise you have to mention that during the in due course of our implementation of CSR policy of the company, we have generated these assets in this financial year, and reasons if your company has failed to spend 2% of your average net profit. And do remember, my dear learners, in the compliance report, the CSR committee basically report in the annual report of CSR, which is basically forming part of board of directors report. It is basically board's report that the implementation and monitoring of CSR policy is in compliance with the CSR objective and policy of the company. They have to sign that see it is in compliance with the CSR objective and policy of the company, and for providing this statement, the CSR committee may rely on utilization certificate, monitoring reports, and whatever they have obtained for the purpose of implementation. If they have obtained these reports, they are supposed to be mentioned there. So in compliance they have to provide that yes, we have complied with whatever CSR policy and objective we have framed, whether we have achieved or not. So with this, my dear learner, I tried to tell you about the way CSR is being implemented in the companies, in the corporate entities operating in India. In the next lecture of mine, I shall be telling you about the impact assessment, the way it is conducted, and also the penal provisions if you don't comply with these provisions. So I hope you must have understood and enjoyed today's lecture of mine. With this, I am ending today's lecture. Thank you so much.